Good morning, and welcome to the Colorado Health Foundation's webinar on successfully planning and implementing a capital project that is being hosted by our partner City Projects today. I am Sarah Overby, a Program Officer at the Colorado Health Foundation, and I'm the chairperson for today's webinar. If we could go ahead and have folks introduce themselves and their organization in the chat box, I'll get started with some housekeeping notes. Our webinar today is being recorded, so anyone who can't attend today can catch it later, or you can access it later. Tomorrow you'll receive an email with a link to the recording and a PDF of the presentation. In order to minimize background noise, attendees are in listen-only mode. Feel free to send your questions via the chat function at any time during the presentation. We will not be using the raise hand function, so no need to click it if you have questions. Just send it in the chat box. If you have any technical difficulties, ReadyTalk's toll-free technical support is extremely helpful. Finally, after the webinar has concluded, you will have the opportunity to give us feedback through a short survey to help us improve future presentations. As many of you know, the Foundation partners with a variety of organizations to make Colorado the healthiest state in the nation. We hope this webinar today will serve as a useful resource to clinics in the state who are planning or thinking about planning capital projects. At the end of this webinar, I will briefly discuss a funding opportunity we put together to support these kinds of projects. The objectives for this webinar are to share best practices for expanding, renovating, or developing real estate projects for safety net clinics. We want you to understand how to successfully manage a real estate development project, and we want to help you identify what steps and actions you need to take. My contact information is on our website, and it will be at the end of the webinar if you have any questions. Now handing it over to City Projects.
Good morning. This is Sherry Kirschbaum, founder and president of City Projects. We're very happy that so many of you have joined today, and we look forward to presenting our best practices for real estate development for nonprofit facilities. If some of you could just let us know what organizations are joining. We see your name on the list, but if there's anybody that joined late and you haven't put your name out there, we'd appreciate it now. Real estate development is complex and it can be costly, but when done well, the ripple effect can impact your organization in ways not even imagined as you plan for the expansion of your safety net clinic. We're excited to talk about best practices that we have learned from working with over 40 clients throughout Colorado and beyond. We also want to thank the Colorado Health Foundation for their commitment to supporting their grantees to fulfill their missions. A new clinic has the potential, as you saw within Mental Health Center of Denver's video, to impact your organizations, those who serve, those who are served, and the community at large. The day that the Mental Health Center of Denver's Recovery Center opened, there were people that were coming in early in the morning, and one of their consumers stood at the front door, and she turned to the left and turned to the right and then looked at the reception area. And to no one in particular, she said, "You did this for us." And so I think many people who are used to being seen in facilities that aren't necessarily similar to what some of us are comfortable with, when an investment is made by the organization, it's life-changing. For this webinar, we will be talking about real estate development best practices within these 5 modules, each representing an essential phase that catalyzes the next phase to ensure your project's success. The sequence is important. However, if you have started your project in a different order, we will help you know how to put the pieces together. If you haven't yet started, then this morning you will hear about where to begin and more. Since we'd like to better gauge where you are in your project, please answer the question on your screen. What phase is your project in? Planning, pre-development, funding and financing, design, or construction? Great. Well, it looks like over 60% of you are just in the planning phase, and about 13 are in pre-development. 20% of you have started some type of financing and funding. And there isn't anybody that started design, but 6% of you have started construction. So it looks like planning is really on everyone's mind, and we will continue to talk about that as well as the other modules. Every organization has reasons for considering a real estate project. Either you're out of space, the building has issues that are costly, the location isn't correct, it doesn't allow for future growth, and others that I'm sure you're thinking about as I speak. Knowing what outcomes you desire to achieve is important. We call these critical success factors on which your project will be measured. Knowing what your critical success factors are defines the why before you get into the how. And as you're having your celebration for your dedication, it's really great to be able to look back at the time it took for planning and to recognize that your vision was fulfilled. Planning, as we saw, was essential, and since 60% of you are in that phase, we want to go over why planning is important. The organization's leadership will need to determine the capacity for developing a real estate project. If there's significant change in the scale of the operation, such as needing additional staff, increase in operating costs, and the addition of new programs or services, we recommend completing a business plan. While strategic planning is really important, we feel that the business plan is the third leg of the stool. A fundraising plan will capitalize on the opportunity to conduct a capital campaign, and a real estate plan determines the feasibility and also provides a roadmap for the project, which should include a comprehensive project budget, schedule, and timeline, as well as realistic financial models that can illustrate the project's costs and the sources which will be used to pay for the project. Setting up an efficient and reliable structure for the exchange of information, the ability to delegate the tasks associated with the project, and effective decision making, it's important to surround yourself with internal stakeholders that will work together towards the project's successful completion. This slide illustrates a model that we have found to be very effective as the ED or CEO begins to organize his or her team to help build the project. It's also important to know that these projects require additional human capital to complete, which is a really important point to express to your board. Staff already has day jobs, so expanding committees, appointing an internal project manager, and adding professional expertise will prevent the sense of overwhelm that leadership sometimes fears. Most underestimate the amount of human capital required to manage these tasks effectively while still performing the daily tasks required for one position. Seek help early and often.
Good morning, everyone. This is Jason Newcomer. Thanks for joining. So once the organization has looked at the why and understood what the need is for real estate, and also looked internally at the capacity, then it's the time to start considering looking at real estate options. And these are the three common expansions or opportunities for organizations, whether it be an expansion of the current space, acquisition, renovation of a new property, or new construction. And it's important to realize there's really no one ideal solution that fits across all organizations, but rather it's an individual by individual decision. In one instance, an expansion may be better than an acquisition renovation. So it's important to recognize that a one-size-fits-all doesn't work for every organization. When you're thinking about some of the main factors that drive this decision in terms of what do you do, whether you expand or look for other properties, some of the most important factors that we find really are what is the existing condition of the current facility? Will it facilitate expansion or renovation that could meet the needs or not? Another common factor is the financial resources and capacity of the organization. What do they have in terms of financing capacity to be able to bring forth their plan? Another important consideration is the time horizon for the organization. When looking at a real estate is a long-term decision. So recognizing where the organization is in that time horizon will be important in making that decision. And then lastly, it's the real estate opportunity. So for opportunities where you're looking for acquisition, renovation, or new construction, it's important to realize that there's a real estate market out there that no one controls, and you have to be ready and opportunistic to look for properties that may come across and fit. So now it's time for the next poll question to get a gauge for where people are. And so what project are you considering if you're in the planning stage? So if you could please answer the poll question, whether it be an expansion, acquisition, renovation, or new construction. That will help us to better understand and tailor our presentation as we continue on. And it looks like it's almost equally split between, well actually it's being updated right now, but it looks like it's acquisition, renovation, and expansion are the two currently types of projects that are being considered, with a small percentage considering new construction. It's important to recognize that you don't have to make a decision on which one you're going to do when you start your planning process. It's important to realize that you have to be open, and as you continue the planning process, some of the indicators will start to guide you towards the right decision.
Some of you may know about Clinica Tepeyac in Denver, in the Globeville, Swansea area, and if you've heard about the expansion for the stock show, they are located right in the middle of all this activity. And with Medicaid expansion, they are clearly out of space with the clinic that you see in this picture. We just completed a real estate plan for Clinica, and as we were wrapping up, their initial FQ application was denied, and then 2 weeks later they got notice that it was accepted. So they now are an FQHC, which is very exciting for them. So they are moving forward in a coordinated direction to build their internal capacity, and already started the quiet phase of the capital campaign to develop a brand new medical home, which will be about 20,000 square feet. So this is a very exciting time for Clinica, and I'm sure you'll be hearing more about their project as the months and years go by.
So the second module, pre-development. After the planning stage has been laid out, we now go into the pre-development stages, and would like to cover some of the key components that are involved in pre-development. The first is understanding property due diligence, and whether you're doing an acquisition or looking at renovating your own property, it's important to really understand that you have to do a deep dive into the real estate. This is a list of some of the 10 or 11 important components that you would come across for property due diligence. And when looking at commercial buildings, it's important to recognize that it's a little more challenging than what most people may be used to when, say for example, thinking about a single family residence. For single family, you have a single inspector that will come to your home and put together a comprehensive report. For commercial buildings, they're much more complex, and unfortunately there isn't one source that can put all of this information together, and in fact it usually takes somewhere between 4 and 6 separate specialists going into the property to really understand and put together a comprehensive due diligence. So while it can seem like a lot of added expense and time, understanding each of these components is really important, especially when trying to develop a really realistic budget and making sure that you'll have the resources and the plan to be able to execute the project. One important item that I will note in there that does come up, especially with existing renovations, is the environmental engineering. And really what that is making sure that you do environmental testing. A lot of properties that were originally built from the 40s all the way up into the 90s can have asbestos or lead paint, and a lot of times that can catch people off guard after when they're looking at a property or acquiring a property, and can be extremely expensive to abate and also cause some environmental hazards. So it's something important to look at. Community outreach, another important component when conducting due diligence and looking at a property. And what it's really important that we find is that understanding which organizations, neighborhood organizations, are going to be in your area, and reaching out to them early to introduce yourself and begin the process of letting them know what types of services that you'll be providing in the community, I think can really gain a lot of traction and find new stakeholders and strong support before you even move into a community and open your doors. So we think encourage clients to really be proactive in finding who is in their community and not wait until after you acquire the building to start that process. Budget, costs. So one of the critical questions that comes up pretty quickly when looking at facilities project is, what is it going to cost? And it's so important to get the good and accurate costing information as you're working through the planning and pre-development process. And that takes bringing on some expertise. So general contractors, cost estimators, designers, or owner's reps are some of the resources that you can reach out to develop a comprehensive budget. In this slide, this is a graphic representation of what the typical ranges are for the three main categories for a project budget. Hard costs, which is the predominant component, which is really all the physical construction costs that it takes for a project. That may include the general contractor's costs. It may also include fixture, furniture, and equipment, and IT solutions. The second component is the acquisition costs. So if you are purchasing a property, that will be a key component and key cost of the total overall budget, anywhere from 0 to 40% that we find with projects. And then soft costs is a third component, and while it's the smallest, it's still a significant part, and that is really all the other ancillary components that it takes to put together a project. So that involves the city permits, any fees that you may be paying to municipalities, the design costs, the project management costs, the financing costs. This is the category that probably typically gets left out the most, but certainly can have a major impact on a budget if you think about 10 to 25%. So important consideration to come up with. It's important to also realize that a budget is not a static number. It involves new information. And as you get that new information, you should be constantly improving that budget based on the project progressing. And one common question that we get from a lot of CFOs when we start working with clients is, when are we going to know exactly how much this project is going to cost? And the answer we give them sometimes surprises them. And it's really, you're not going to know exactly until the end of the project. Real estate projects have a lot of unknowns and a lot of risk, and you're constantly having to make decisions and build budgets on imperfect information, which is natural and can happen. That certainly should not stop you from trying to put together the best budget that you have based on the information that you need. And the primary component that will protect you from the unknowns is having contingency. And what that is a line item in the development budget that is for unknowns. And really one of the things that we like to say is the only thing that we know for sure is going to happen on a project is that there will be unknowable things that will come up. And if those contingency funds, that is your best defense against covering those that may have cost implications. Typically what we like to see for renovations is at least 8 to 10% of the construction budget be in a contingency. And for new construction, it sometimes can be lower, somewhere in the 6 to 8% range. But making sure you have something in there is really important. Some of the biggest sources for the unknowns, the contingency is there for, is existing building conditions. While you may have good plans on a building that you are looking at or currently own, no one knows exactly what's behind all the walls or underneath the slab or in the roof. So knowing that things may pop up and having funds that can cover that will be important. Another big source for unknowns, underground conditions. If you're building a new project, digging into the ground, you may find or discover things that may not be quite what you expect, and may take some additional dollars to cover that. And then the third is city review and approvals. It is always a rigorous process to get all the regulatory approvals needed for the project. And recognizing that the city may come back with comments that may change the design that can add costs. So it's important to have that. And then lastly, don't forget about inflation. So if this project is being used in a year or two from now, especially in the market in Colorado and along the Front Range, construction costs are going up and are going up anywhere between 3 and 10% a year, depending on who you ask. So it's important to recognize that you have some factor to take that into account depending on the timing that you may have for that project. Schedule, another second really critical tool for the pre-development and planning process. Having a schedule and recognizing that you can use that to track your progress throughout will really help ensure the success. The pre-construction schedule, which are really all the activities that happen before you actually put a shovel in the ground, is really what is most important. As you can see on the slide of the 6 kind of main components of a schedule, 5 of those really deal with pre-development before you even start construction. And don't underestimate those pre-development efforts. We find, especially with nonprofit facilities, the pre-development and planning activities take a long time, and it can take sometimes up to a year or 2 in pre-planning for a construction project that may only take, when you start construction, 6 to 10 months. So looking at the feasibility of the project, understanding the fundraising, how that is going to come together. If there's an acquisition, certainly needs to take into account the schedule and timeline, and that's really one that sometimes you don't have a lot of control of when you're going to find the property that is going to be the right fit. Design, financing, and construction are the other components of the schedule that progress once you make it past the acquisition. In terms of recognizing the unknowns, also be prepared for delays in the schedule. There are things that no one can expect that will come up that will cause the group or project team to have to rework the information in the plan in order to move forward. So recognize that the schedule is going to be updated many, many times, and we would find probably on average 10 to 15 different updates on a schedule as we would progress through pre-development. This is a graphical representation of the importance of making decisions early. And as an engineer mind, this is something that sometimes I think can help recognize that it's really important for leadership in the group and the internal project team to be involved in early. And so what this graph shows across the bottom is the sequence of pre-development where you go from planning through the design and then the construction. And the orange arrow that is going from the upper left-hand corner to the lower right-hand corner is what's called the opportunity to influence. And so what you can see is early on in the planning and programming stage of the project, that's where you can have the most influence. It's the easiest to bring in the big ideas and explore them and see what is going to be work best for the organization. As you progress through the design and more of it gets defined, that opportunity to influence gets lower. And conversely, which is represented in the brown line, the cost for changes goes up. So the longer you wait on a project to make the bigger decisions, the more risk there is for it to be more expensive. As an example, reconfiguring rooms, really easy when you're in the design stage because all you have to do is erase some lines and put some new lines on a piece of paper. When you're in construction and you are wanting to make a change, it's much more expensive. And those walls have to come down and get adjusted. So this is just trying to reiterate the importance of being part of it. This is a shot of the Olathe Clinic, and I see that we've got a few people on the webinar from Olathe, and we had helped them in their pre-planning process for a clinic. And what was really, I think, exemplary that kind of speaks to the pre-development was the due diligence that went into the acquisition of the facility that they moved into. It was an older, tired retail space that was on the main street of Olathe that when you first walked through it, you know, if you didn't have some vision, it looked like it might be a little bit of a challenge to try and put a clinic in there. But through really understanding and diving into the property and bringing on the right team, we're able to transform that into their new medical home clinic in Olathe. So this is the 7, kind of a highlight of the real estate development basics. And we have covered 4 of these components, and we've covered the project type, which was talking about expansion, renovation. Talked about property due diligence and project budget. and project schedule. And we're going to cover the other three in following modules. But right now I'd like to transition a little more detail into project budget, which is once you develop a number, how do you look at funding and financing this project? So now with our third module, we're going to move into some of the details of funding and financing.
These are the sources that you're going to find that might be available for your project, and all of them should be investigated because you don't want to leave any stone unturned. For the next few minutes, we want to leverage the experience in the room to dive a bit deeper into the financial sources that you may want to use for your capital project. We find that most small communities or smaller organizations are kind of afraid of doing a capital campaign. But from our experience, it's a missed opportunity if you don't. Regardless of the number of people that you are serving, their community typically recognizes the strength and the importance of your safety net clinic. We have seen time and time again that with the proper feasibility study that capital campaigns can indeed be successful and also do a great job of raising the profile of your organization in the community. There will be people that will support you, and even though they may not have a relationship with you now, they can have a relationship with you in the future. Just last evening, Dr. Carl Clark from Mental Health Center of Denver spoke at an event, and he told his first experience of fundraising. And he wanted to ask this potential donor for $1 million. And so he went to his home and was terrified, and he forced himself to ask. And the donor said, well, we've decided we'd like to give you $100,000, but in order to get to your $1 million, we'll host a dinner with all of our high net worth friends. And before they left the dinner, he had his $1 million. And I realize that sounds like a lot of money in smaller communities, but I think the process can be replicated. As far as foundations and grants, while the generosity of the Colorado Health Foundation certainly has benefited safety net clinics, it's prudent for you to do your research to identify other foundations that fund capital projects, such as Caring for Colorado and perhaps smaller community-based funders. One thing that has happened in the last couple of years with some of Colorado's capital grant funders is that they've all become more targeted in terms of the types of projects that they wish to fund. Betcher Foundation used to be a great source, but they have changed their grant guidelines, and so has the Bonfils Staton Foundation, which is now focusing on arts and culture. But with a little bit of research, different foundation grants are there, both locally and nationally. Often an untapped source are local and state funds such as community development block grants, which are performance-based loans and typically are forgiven after 7 years as long as the terms of the grant are met. We've been working with Centennial Mental Health in Fort Morgan, and they utilize the USDA financing model, and so that is also available in rural communities.
Cash reserves is another important component of a project. And what we find is that it's not so much important how much the organization's dollars go into a project, but having that there is some dollars showing the level of investment that the organization is making to a project. So whether it makes up 1% or 50% of the capital stack that goes towards a project, we find that funders really see that as an important component, an important step in the organization investing in their future. So we think that certainly is an important part. Impact investments, that's an emerging trend that the Health Foundation actually is also embarking upon. And those can come in a variety of different forms, but it's really a social investment that is made to an organization that has some form of payback of that investment. And that could be in a low form of like a low interest loan, partially forgivable loan, or grants that a certain percent needs to get paid back by a certain amount of time. What it really is just a lower cost of financing for organizations, and can form some critical gap funding for a project if there ends up being some shortfall based off of the cash reserves and capital campaign and other foundation grants and federal funds that are needed. The last component that could be an option is debt. And while in the good old days, a lot of funders and some boards for nonprofits consider that a four-letter word, but that is no longer the case. And debt can play a role in a sustainable funding stream for organizations for capital projects. But it's just important to recognize that there needs to be some pretty thorough due diligence for that to be able to make sure that that's a viable option. Some of the types of lenders that are available, CDFIs, which are community development finance institutions. These are actually nonprofits that are formed by pooling money from CRA lenders that can offer more favorable terms to nonprofits and community investment opportunities. Private commercial banks, so most all organizations have relationships with lenders and have a lender, so they are certainly a very active source in providing debt financing and welcome the opportunity for nonprofit partners to have loans for projects. And then foundations, as we mentioned, as foundations start to look to making impact investments and other forms of capital contributions to projects. Program-related investments are some of the, again, emerging trends that foundations may make that are a little bit of a hybrid of a grant and a loan. And so again, these are some of the different types of organizations that can help when looking at potentially debt. Reasons to use financing. Probably the biggest one is timing. So when you look at overlaying what the schedule of the outflow for a capital real estate project over with the money that you're going to be bringing into the projects, there usually is a shortfall. And that's primarily because capital campaigns can take somewhere up to a year and a half, 2 years, maybe even 3 years, while the actual construction project may be only 8 to 10 months. So there may be time for some bridge financing to cover the cost of construction while you're raising the balance of the funds. Preserving liquidity, so if not using all of an organization's reserves or other capital sources they may have that may be needed for operations. So it's a priority of the resources that the organization may have that could lead them to use debt. And expanding the project scope. So when looking at the funding sources that are available relative to the budget and program, sometimes there may need to be bring in some additional capital, some additional financing that can really make the project include all the components that the organization needs for the long term. Financing has its place. It's important to recognize if you are going to start to explore having financing for a project, having financial history, which is usually 3 to 5 years of financial statements that the lender organizations ask for to get a handle on where the organization's capacity is. It's important to recognize that there will be some form of equity that needs to be part of it. So it can't be all financed with debt, of course. And that equity can come in the form of some of your hard-earned cash, or it could actually come in from other foundation grants, because a lot of lenders will treat that as the equivalent of owner's equity for a project. And then debt service, looking at the operating financials for an organization and recognizing that they have either the fee-for-service or government contracts or funding, stable funding mechanism that can allow them to make the debt service payments over the life of the loan. So those are the three important components to look at when starting to explore financing. And then the actual options besides lenders, there's conventional real estate loans, which involve the bank lending and using the real estate as collateral to make that loan. Line of credits are also another form, sometimes used for bridge financing, that can be a lot easier than getting a conventional loan and can make a lot of sense depending on the scope and scale of the project and the nature of the relationship with the bank that you have. And then bonds, as a tax-exempt organizations, there are opportunities to issue tax-exempt bonds. And the main advantage for them is that you can get lower interest rates locked for longer periods of time and can get terms even up to 20 years for a particular bond. So it can be and typically is more expensive, and you usually want to make sure you have at least a sizable enough of a potential loan to have it make worth your while. What we typically find is anything over $2 million justifies looking at a bond to see if it can be competitive or actually be even a better long-term option than the other debt options we've got listed. This is a picture of Doctors Care, safety net clinic that we worked with in helping them to acquire and renovate a property that they were in, a multi-tenant property that they were in, and we're currently operating in. And what was unique about this was in helping them to look at the financing options, we looked at a whole variety. So we reached out and looked at getting a line of credit with their existing banks. Got some proposals for traditional real estate loans. Also got a CDFI organization to put forth a proposal, and then also looked at bond financing. So I think it's important to recognize that you can look across the entire spectrum and compare them to see which one's going to be the best fit. And depending on the economic conditions, depending upon interest rates and what is going on, any one of those options could be most favored. So I think it's important to realize, like the one-size-fits-all does not work when looking at project types, the same thing goes for financing. The fourth module we're going to be looking at is the design and what is important and critical for organizations through this component of the project. It's first important to recognize that, as Sherry alluded to, there's an internal project team that's going to be needed, and the resources that make up what we call the internal project team, which usually involves a CEO or executive director or other C-level leadership that helps really get the organization moving in the direction towards this project, and really terms as kind of the chief cheerleader and getting all the troops engaged and moving forward with this project. An internal project manager, someone who's going to be able to be a point of contact with the design team and other stakeholders to help make sure that there's consensus within the organization as major decisions are made for the project. A lot of organizations also will form a facility committee, which usually is an outgrowth from the board. And this group kind of serves as the oversight to give advice, to help with major decisions on the project, and to give the board a comfort level that there's appropriate risk management oversight going on. And then certainly the board and stakeholders have a key role in fundraising and ensuring the overall goals are incorporated into a successful project. The external team members. There are a variety and host of external team members that are out there that can help complete a project. And this is a list of the 9 most common external members that can help complete a project. One of them that I think important to highlight that really is becoming more and more important as we found projects over the last several years is IT specialists. And recognizing that technology really has a role to play with facilities in order to leverage the existing real estate, because most organizations can't build enough real estate to meet their capacity. So they're going to have to use not only a real estate facility in terms of size, but also the technology and the flexibility of the space to give them that enhanced productivity and capacity. And so recognizing that technology really has a role to play and is at the forefront of design really is important and can play a critical role. The design components. So there are 3, when you hire a design team and they start through the design process, there are 3 main phases of a design as the progression of the design occurs. The first is schematic design. Designers can sometimes refer to this as SD. And this is really the very kind of first third of the design where you'll put together rudimentary floor plans and come up with kind of basic descriptions of what the project will be like. The next phase is the design development phase, which is where the plans are further detailed and building systems are defined. It's important to realize that most of the big decisions are made in the schematic design phase. During the design development phase, that's when some of the kind of not as big decisions, but still important decisions are made when it comes to selecting finishes and comes to some of the other decisions about IT infrastructure and security. And then the last phase is the construction documents, and that's really where the project design team puts together documents that are going to be able to be permitted, and also a general contractor can put together a firm fixed number and build off of the set. Another emerging trend that we find is really critical is trying to take advantage of how you incorporate healthy design into real estate. And we think for organizations that are in the business of keeping people healthy and making people healthy, it only makes sense that the real estate that you develop and facilities that you have are aligned with that and creating healthy places. And there's a growing body of research that is showing that the environment and physical environment has a huge impact on people's health, both mentally and physically. So this is some of the summary that actually came from a Building Healthy Places toolkit that the Health Foundation in partnership with ULI put together that brings some of the important components that will allow healthy places to exist for the employees. So encouraging activity, encouraging natural light, encouraging spaces for collaboration, and also creating healthy places for those that are served, for people that are coming in and receiving services, and how can you create a place that encourages that. So these are just some of the big concepts that we think is important as you start the design process to really bring to the fold at the start with the design team, so you know that some of these can be thought of and incorporated appropriately. Certainly a component that I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with this is the medical home design. And what we find with a lot of clients with clinics is that they're in existing clinics that they've been in for maybe 10, 15, 20 years. And the existing infrastructure and layout does not in any way promote or facilitate a medical home collaborative process. And in fact, probably ties one hand or even two hands behind their back. So understanding and recognizing and making sure you have team members that are able to incorporate the medical home design so that, again, the real estate works with the organization in meeting that. And that really comes to what type of services, integrated services, will you be providing in this facility? How will this collaboration amongst the team members and service providers work, and how do you want to promote that collaboration through the allocation of space and the layout of space? Creating an accommodating environment for those who are coming in to receive services to make sure that their experience is welcoming and refreshing and, again, aligns with their process of trying to heal. Leveraging technology we mentioned, and then designing for flexibility. One thing we know that this is an evolving process and an evolving healthcare delivery model. So recognizing where you can embed flexibility in the real estate will help you evolve in the coming years. The last module is construction, and to a certain extent, this is almost the easy part. The pre-development and getting all of the modules that we just talked about before really is where all the hard work comes together. And once you get the shovel in the ground, while the general contractor certainly has to perform and is on the hot seat to make sure it happens, really if you've done the planning process, if you've done the pre-development and have the tools of schedule and budget that we've mentioned earlier, it really should be a smooth sailing process during the construction portion. It's important to recognize that there are a few different project delivery options that you may have, and what that refers to is how is the project going to be executed from a design and construction perspective. And there are three main delivery options that are out there for owners. The first is the traditional. On the left-hand side, you'll see a design, bid, build. That's the traditional delivery method that has been around forever, where you hire a designer and they design the plans. Then you go out to the construction market and hard bid the project. Then you hire the successful bidder, and go build it. Another option, which is the middle one, which is CMGC. That's Construction Manager General Contractor. And that's a delivery method where you hire the designer, and during the middle of the design process, you bring on a construction manager partner who will be there for at least 2/3 of the design process to help guide the budget and provide input on the design. So when you get ready to build, you can make sure that you've got a project that is still in sync with the budget and ready to go once it gets permitted. And then the third option is design build, and that's where you hire a single company, typically a general contractor, that brings on underneath them the design team. So it's one procurement, one team that has both the design and the construction all together from the start, and you have one point of contact, and they guide you through that project process together from the start. Like financing and like project options, there is no one best fit for any particular type of project, and it really depends on the circumstances and the capacity of the organization and the desire of what the organization is trying to achieve in the project delivery. That's going to make the most sense for the project. I will say that this is one of the more important decisions that an owner can make when looking at how this project is going to be achieved. Value engineering. Yes, if any of you have gone through projects before, you'll probably associate more of this with the lemon than with the lemonade. But what really this comes down to is aligning what you want for the project with the dollars and the budget that you have. And as I mentioned, it's an iterative process, but all projects, if you have a budget, there are things that you won't be able to afford, and that's perfectly natural. And it's important to realize that that's going to occur sometime during the design process. And we think that it really actually makes the project stronger, because it forces the owner to prioritize what is most important for this project that's going to give us the biggest bang for the buck. And so value engineering is where once you have the design and start to get budget updates, you find out whether you are on track with budget or you're over budget, and you need to make some decisions to look at alternative methods or means or materials or layouts to try to align what you want with the dollars that you have. Another important component to really think about, and this probably has the biggest play when it comes to the timing and the schedule, and that's city entitlement, which is really just a fancy way of saying getting the approvals from all the city and agencies. Depending on where you are, it can be anywhere from 2 to 10 different agencies that you may have to get approvals from for this particular project. And to some, it may seem like it is a flaming hoop that you have to jump through. But we see it as a partnership and something that you have to be extremely proactive with the city entities to make sure that that's a successful process. Because if you aren't prepared or don't have the project team or expertise to help you through that, that can really have a major impact on the timing of the project. This is a rendering of TRU. They are a hospice and now will be a PACE provider going in Lafayette, Colorado. And they were a really fine example of the entitlement challenges that had to be overcome. And this particular project involved some pretty complex agreements with all the adjacent property owners to share a variety of infrastructure, stormwater infrastructure, sidewalk infrastructure, and really took a collaborative and proactive process to work through that in order to get the permits and start construction. And they just, happy to say, they just started construction about 2 weeks ago and are well on their way. But again, I think it's important to recognize that there certainly will be some unknowns that need to be addressed when you're trying to get all the city approvals, and just have to have an active, proactive team to be ready to address that and respond accordingly. So I realized that we have gone through this pretty fast. We only had an hour to discuss and want to save some time for questions and answers. But we think this slide, as the title suggests, really puts it all together in terms of the different components or modules of development and puts it in a kind of timeline fashion. So you, when you look at it right now, it may kind of make your eyes glaze over, but you know, after you've thought about it and kind of let some of the information internalize, taking a look at it, I think can provide some insight. And just as a kind of informational of what it contains, on the far left side, vertically, you'll see the main kind of planning components: feasibility, fundraising, acquisition, design, financing, and construction. And each of those parts then move from left to right in terms of progress. And you can see that each of those components build on them as the project progresses in time. And there are certain parts that you need to make sure you have progressed before you move on to the next component. So certainly fundraising, having that moving forward after you do the planning is important. And then folding in the acquisition and design after you've achieved certain predetermined success for the fundraising. Again, and then it rolls into the design, financing, and construction. We have highlighted, this is different for each organization, but we have highlighted, you'll see in some of the captions or bubbles, about when you want to have fundraising milestones complete as the project progresses. And this is different for every organization. It really is depending upon the risk tolerance of leadership. But we would suggest it's important to really outline and lay out those key goals so you know when the go, no-go gates are hit for that. And then also overlaying the financing. If that is part of the project, it's really important to recognizing that that timing needs to be folded in early as the design is starting.
Good morning, everyone. This is Sarah Overby again with the Colorado Health Foundation. We will have two grant deadlines, October 15th and February 15th. The goal of our funding opportunity will be to increase access to care. And let me go to the next slide to get to our criteria. So what are we looking for? We're looking for primary care clinics that are serving the underserved in Colorado. We want you to demonstrate that you need to expand access, which I'm sure will be easy for all of you. We also are looking for a relatively immediate impact on access, so we'll be looking for projects that can be completed within about 12 months of receipt of funding. So if you apply for the October or the February cycle, that will impact when we would look at the end deadline. We will also have up to $500,000 per project, and we're aiming to support no more than 25% of a budget. Low interest loans may be available depending on your own financing and interest. And that is the quick and dirty. So if you have any questions about the funding opportunity, here's my contact information, and please do not hesitate to call me. There is no question too big or too small. We can talk about your individual project. And now if you have any questions for city projects or myself, go ahead and put them into the chat box.
This is Sherry. We're not seeing any questions, so if there aren't any, we'd be happy to answer them. If you want to look at our website at www.city-projects.com, and there is a link for info@city-projects, or feel free to email us and we'd be happy to get back to you on an individual basis. If there aren't any questions, we just really want to thank you all for taking your, well, we have one. Will the application for capital look the same as a general application? Sarah, I think this one's for you.
Hi, Jordan. The application for the capital opportunity will look the same as the general application. And Joe, we are looking for projects that are a little bit further along. So if you're in the planning phase and you don't think that you would be able to have your project done within 12 months of completed construction, it may not be a fit for you to apply for this funding opportunity, but we will have future funding opportunities. And Ellen, we will have a part of the application will describe the attachments that we've requested, and it will include some of your plans. And I'm happy to talk to you more about that one-on-one. And Alicia, so underserved populations, we typically describe those as your Medicaid or Medicare population or uninsured. Carolyn, decisions for grants are always 4 months from the date of our deadline. So for October 15th, the deadline for decisions will be February 15th the following year. And for February 15th, that grant deadline, the decisions will be made 4 months, which is June 15th. And Joe, yes, completion would mean that a building is open and ready to see patients. Sometimes I know clinics have opened parts of buildings that maybe there's a section that's still under construction but it's serving patients. You could wrap abatement costs into the overall project cost, which is what you would be, we would be basing the project cost percentage off of. And that one was for Joe. It looks like we have maybe answered all the questions for today. So tomorrow you should receive an email that has the PDF attachment of the webinar slides and a link to the website where you can see the recording. We'll also, if you have any other questions or you feel like yours didn't get answered, feel free to email me and we'll provide a written copy of the answers to the questions. Thank you, everyone.